And as Kate said, we all met here 5 years ago, all 5 of us at summer school. And since then, informally, we networked together, got to know each other, supported each other in our career. And then about the end of last year, following the initiative of a group of our New York colleagues who set up a translators collective called Sedilla and Company, we decided that it would be a good idea for us to do the same and basically formalise the kind of work we've been doing informally previously, and to help us be more effective in pitching books to publishers and developing our careers. So, who are we? Paul Russell Garrett translates from Danish and Norwegian and sometimes Swedish. He's translated half a dozen novels, 7 of which are coming out this year, including Lars Wooting's The 16 Trees of the Soul. He's received quite a few funding awards from the Pen Translates programme, from the Danish Arts Council, and from NORLA, the Norwegian Arts Council. He serves on the committee of the UK Translators Association, and he also has a particular interest in theatre translation. His wife Katrina runs a theatre company in London called Foreign Affairs, which specialises in staging texts in translation, and they run since last year a programme specifically for translators who want to learn how to translate theatre. It's called Foreign Affairs Translates, and Paul is head of the translation element of that, because there's also a, shall we say, a theatrical element. Translators on the programme learn about the role of the actors and the staging process. Paul's in charge of the translation bit. That's it.
That's good. Thanks, Roland. Ruth Clarke translates from French, Italian, Spanish, not Portuguese yet. Okay. Still.
Work in progress.
Okay. Yeah. We'll have to ask Zoe about that one.
Yeah.
Ruth brings to the Starling Bureau. She's had spent some years translating working in legal translation, working in the travel industry, and with that she brings an eclectic blend of fiction and non-fiction to us. Having worked with authors ranging from Benin to Venezuela. Ruth is currently pitching with the Starling Bureau. She's pitching a book from Benin. And has a publication from Venezuela has just come out called Crude Words, and you've got 2 stories.
2 pieces in an anthology.
In an anthology. And Ruth is also interested in bringing translation to the public as well. Having worked at the Spectacular Translation Machine, having worked with them at the South Bank Centre, and working at the Chronicles Project in The Hague.
I think so.
Yeah, nice.
We also have, in the middle up there, Morgan Giles, who translates from Japanese. She is currently in Japan, 2-year scholarship studying female Japanese writers and the translation of their work. She is a contributor to the Times Literary Supplement and an organiser of Japan Now, the Japanese Literature Festival. Next to her up there and next to me here, we have Roland Glasser. He is a translator from French. He has a background in fiction and non-fiction, as well as the theatre. He is also involved in the Foreign Affairs Translates programme and is a translation mentor. He is a member of the Translators Association Committee and their delegate to Seattle.
What is Seattle?
What is Seattle?
It's the European Council of Literary Translators Association. So basically it's an umbrella group to which all of the literary translators associations in different countries in Europe belong to.
But primarily he is a translator.
Yeah.
Best known for his translation of This Long Michelle's Tram 83, which was nominated for the Malbec International Prize and the Best Translated Book Award. Last but not least, we also have Zoë Perry, who is a translator from Portuguese. She's translated works by many Portuguese language writers, and she was the translator in residence at the Flip International Literary Festival in Paris in 2015. She has a Penheim grant for her translation of Veronica Stiger's novel Opisanie Świata. Apologies for my Polish. Yes, the title is in Polish, the book is in Portuguese. She is pitching that book through the Starling Bureau, so that is her current project, using the system which we are about to describe.
So why pitch a book? Why would you do that? Well, obviously you want to bring top quality literature to the English-speaking world. It goes without saying. But it's not always easy for publishers to find that literature, which might seem rather bizarre because they go to these book fairs and they're sold stuff, or people try and sell them stuff. But they're not always expert in being plugged in to what's going on in a particular language or culture. And the foreign publishers who are trying to sell them books probably mostly aren't very aware of, they'll have some idea of the kind of books that might work well in the UK or the US, but they go to be pitching them books which may not be entirely suitable to their list or to the market. And so it's important that as translators we have a really important role. I mean, we think of what we do as translators, we translate books. But actually as a working literary translator, part of our role is acting, kind of as an agent, informally often, to bringing these works to English language publishers. And so researching what's hot at the moment, the writers that should be translated, books that are doing well, and pitching those to publishers. That's part of the why. But also the pitching process itself, just let me backtrack. How do you become a literary translator? One of the main ways you become a literary translator is through networking. It's through getting to know publishers, essentially. And yes, you can do that at book fairs and at various events, but it's much, much, much easier and more effective to do that when you're talking to a publisher if you actually have something to sell them. They may not be interested, it may not be for them, but if you can actually say, well, I've got this book or that book, and maybe you'd be interested in that, then, that's going to make you seem more professional, it's going to make you seem more like you know what you're talking about. It's going to help them remember you, because they'll be, oh, yes, Zoë Perry, yeah, that book that was that funny, that type in Polish about, yeah, okay, about the guys going to Brazil, okay. So it helps to build relationships to pitch books to publishers, which may well result in them contacting you to translate a book which you haven't pitched to them, but which they've already bought. And that kind of links into demonstrating your knowledge of the industry, because in order to pitch a book successfully, you have to have some knowledge of the industry. You have to know a little bit about how rights work. You have to have known enough in order to research that and to make contact with foreign publishers or the original author, and to present that to the publisher in a way which, if it's a professional sounding pitch, then you look like you're someone worth knowing, worth working with.
I think there's also a trust factor in there as well. In that you're pitching the right types of books to the right publishers and showing that confidence in them. So it's building a relationship also, but also being someone that they can trust, that they can go to when maybe they've got an agent or a publisher pitching something to them. Maybe they'll contact you to find out about they showed an interest in similar authors before. They seem to know what they're talking about in that field, so it can be quite useful to build the trust between them. So when the next project comes along, they would turn to you. So.
And it's amazing how far you can get simply by appearance if you know what you're talking about. I mean, it helps obviously if you do, but really, really, just seeming to be someone who's plugged in, who knows the industry, who knows the sector, who knows other people, public thinks, okay, that's someone, worth being in contact with.
Also, you know more than you think you know.
Yeah.
Because you think you just read books and you know that author and that author. These publishers maybe have never heard of them. So these bits of information that you think are obvious because you know the target language, the source language and the source market, this might be really big news to a publisher. So don't hesitate to mention something that you love because it could be the next big thing that they haven't heard of yet.
So, where do you find your next pitch? Oh, I was meant to be doing this, but I did the previous one.
Some of these seem a little bit obvious, but I don't think if you're not necessarily there, you know, I don't know, I've had people coming to me also for the theatre translation. I do. Where do I find a play? Where do I find out what's going on? I mean, you have to have some connection with the source language and the source country you translate from. And all of these places, I mean, these can go for both source and target language, but
browsing bookshops, I mean, if you're lucky to live in the country from the language from which you translate from, then I guess it's easier. But, you know, most of us, I think, even if we don't live there, will probably visit quite relatively regularly. And
the first place I head when I get off the plane, the first place I go is to the bookstore at the airport. They don't always have the best selection, but it's just so I know exactly what's on their top 10 right now. Translating from Danish, half of them are English anyways, but it is the first place I go just to get a really quick feel for what's going on there. So just make that a habit whenever you go there. I don't know. I think.
And it seems really obvious when you told me that you did that, because I would, you know, I go to Paris, I'll go to, you know, little independent bookstores and I'll look through, but like, you know, when you think about it, you know, an airport bookstore is where like the best-selling stuff are going to be sold.
Yeah.
Book fairs, literary events, festivals, these are useful also because there are fewer titles in a sense. Obviously the book has a lot in total, but if you go to a particular publisher's stand, they'll be showing you a small selection of what they're publishing at the moment, and probably, you know, the books which they think perhaps are the best on their list. And, you know, there are a lot of festivals which are quite specific in all countries. You have festivals devoted to crime, or to comics, or whatever. So you can really narrow that down. And building good contacts with publishers and agents is important. It takes time. In fact, I could probably mention this again at the end. This all takes time, but it's little incremental steps. I've now got a good relationship with a couple of foreign rights people with French publishers, so they're responsible for selling their own books from their publisher and buying in books from British publishers. And so every London Book Fair, I go and have a meeting with them. They show me their catalogue, the books which they think I'll like best. They're probably starting to get to know my taste a bit. And so that's a good way of hearing about books, quite possibly before other people do. And also a good way of picking up information and intelligence about, you know, this title, so-and-so, this particular British publisher is interested in it. That's happened to me last book fair. They were telling me about a book which sounded absolutely great, and they told me which British publisher had bought it and who to contact. And I contacted them, and we had a really great conversation, and I did a sample for them, and they gave it to someone else. Which happens. But, you know, that's at least a contact established that way, also with the British publisher, and, you know, sometimes it'll work.
And when you go to these book fairs, whether that's in your source country or whether that's here, make appointments with the agencies and with the publishers, the foreign publishers, because they'll happily sit there for 20 minutes, half an hour if they've got slots. They'll tell you about everything that they're putting out this year. They'll put you on their mailing list and they'll send you a list of whatever number of books they're doing. So you'll be on that list and you'll be the first one to receive that, even before the UK-based publishers sometimes. So.
Yeah. Prizes. Generally in the country have literary prizes, some have more than others. That's also another good indication of books which have found success in their home country, in their home market. And that's always a good selling point for when you're contacting an English language publisher. And I should just say here, we're talking about the English market, but most of what we say would be really applicable to any market. I know there are people here working in Spanish and Korean. Into English, but mostly this works for any market kind of stuff I'm talking about. Social media. Publishers tweet and they're on Facebook and that can always be quite overwhelming, but if you're quite organised with your social media or whether you just dip in from time, it's quite a good way of keeping track of things which are hot. Maybe even, from fellow translators, some of whom are very, very active in tweeting or stuff.
There are always lists.
Yeah.
Lists of themes, lists of untranslated by language, lists of, it's going to be Women in Translation Month in August. There will be all sorts of lists of translated and untranslated books written by women. All of these are great sources of either books in your source language or things that people are talking about right now that you want to tie into when you suggest and make comparisons.
Which is important to talk about. Yeah.
And last year, just to think about the Women in Translation, which was a kind of informal group of people, mostly translators, some publishers who were interested in this, and which led to the Women in Translation Prize. Every month they compiled lists of, 10, 20 women authors from a particular country or writing a particular language that they feel were not being translated or not translated enough. And these were published by Literary Hub, if I remember correctly. And there are websites people have about particular things and countries and lists everywhere.
Bloggers, book reviewers.
Yeah.
You might find someone in any language who you recognise has good taste and you can trust their recommendations and then maybe pass them on.
Authors. You will meet authors at book fairs and festivals and at events, and even this week there are authors amongst you, I understand. They may talk to you about their own work. Maybe they can tell you about colleagues of theirs who they think are worth looking at. That can be a really important source too. Obviously, with that comes the fact that, we from time to time all get random emails from people saying, hey, please translate my book, it's really wonderful. And often not, but...
Yeah, there are ways of writing that email.
Yeah. But that is a really good source too.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes those meetings with authors, they can be really in random places. Sometimes it's through the publishing context that you have. I've done sample translations, I've done work for Danish agents or publishers, and then the next book fair they go, oh, have you met, this is the author you did this translation for, and then you develop a relationship through that. I think I met a Danish author, he came here a few years ago. There was another event here in Norwich, and it just happened he was giving a talk here, and then he happened to get my email address and contacted me about some poetry he wanted translated. So it can be really random, but use those connections and don't forget them.
Because it's worth pointing out, talking about getting sort of poets and poetry published. I mean, do you guys know Asymptote magazine or Words Without Borders? And there are others. Yeah. Lots of these magazines out there which have published extracts or short pieces, and that's a good way also of getting your foot in the door in general of showcasing a bit of that author's work and your work as well.
And I'll just say one more thing about the prizes, that prizes, they do draw the attention of the UK Publishers Prizes in the source country. I had a terrifying phone call from Christopher MacLehose one day after he'd heard that a Danish writer had won this prestigious Danish award, and they'd been considering him a couple of years ago, and had said no, but then they heard that he'd won this prize, and they said, oh, we want to take another look at him, because maybe there's something, maybe we overlooked something. So they do pay attention to these prizes, and it is worth just following what's going on, and maybe if you have contact with the publisher and you've heard about a prize, maybe you want to mention that to your publisher and say, this is a very prestigious prize in this country, and this person's just won it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, what to pitch?
Yeah, who's taking this one? Ruth, you want to go for that?
No.
No. Okay.
Okay.
I mean, we started off with when did we officially launch? We launched at LBF, London Book Fair, just this year. We'd been meeting beforehand to try and get up some of the sort of hash out details. after London Book Fair, we started looking at what we want to pitch. And the first pitch that we all made, I think all of us knew exactly what we would pitch the first time. We all had one thing that we really wanted to publish, wanted to see published. Very, very different things, and not necessarily the easiest things in the world to sell, but it was the one thing that we really wanted to do, and that was our first pitch. When it came around to doing our second round of pitching, we're looking at building a catalogue of books that we would love to see in English. When it came around to the second round of what we would pitch next, we were a little bit more circumspect, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about building a catalogue, we do think of it a bit in the way that maybe some publishers think about their list, which is, obviously we're not a publisher, but we'd like sort of when people look at the list of books that we're offering, that there's some variety, that we have perhaps books which maybe have more commercial appeal, or maybe are more niche, and also which maybe complement each other, or are not too similar to each other. And so our second pitches are probably going to be a bit more mainstream in focus.
Yeah.
Some of us had more ideas.
Yeah.
In terms,
so we also came with, we each brought, I think more suggestions for our next one, and we were actually...
Yeah, or a dozen in the case of Zoe.
And there was actually a conversation happening. This wasn't, okay, I'm going to do this one. This was a conversation saying, what do you guys think? What should we do here? So that was quite interesting, that we can, that there's that dynamic exists in the group, that we can get the advice of people, and we trust their advice on what to choose.
And so the kind of the criteria we would look for is obviously going to be initially, do we like the book or not? That's the first one. But also considering, so in the question of when it comes to books we're considering at the moment, I'm considering their commercial appeal and how well does the narrative hold up? What's the structure of the book like? Is it similar to other stuff that's out there? Is it too similar? Things like that, and also what the success of these books has been in their home country, what reviews have been like, what sales have been like, what arguments can we muster when trying to convince a publisher that they should publish these. And know your publishers. This is really important, because different publishers will publish different types of books. Some publishers will publish several types of books. I remember you had a story about McElhoes.
Yeah, there was a translator came to me, and I was at a meeting, and I think they had this very literary book, a high-end literary book, and they said, well, I wouldn't want to pitch that to McElhoes because they only do crime. And I thought, no, they do crime and high-end literary fiction. That is exactly what they do. That is exactly the people you should pitch it to. So you have to know your publishers. That's really important. And they do offer different things. They're looking for different types of fiction. So it's really important.
And so you can look at their lists and see whether would your title fit with it. They might already have published certain titles or a particular title which is maybe similar. Maybe your book is similar but not too similar. Maybe it would dovetail nicely. What you don't want to be doing, obviously, is pitching something which they don't do at all. So, you're going to pitch a crime novel to a publisher that only does high industry fiction, or vice versa.
Children's books to
yeah. And I think is that all for that section?
Yeah.
We'll covering some of this in a bit more detail, I think. Here's an example of some of the way we work inside the Starling Bureau is we actually produce sort of pitches which we could call internal pitches. They're for each other.
Like a miniature pitch.
Miniature pitches. And so there'll be a description of the book and we'll list some pros and cons of why we think this book would work. Not just why it would work, but we might include things such as, maybe this publisher is very difficult to get hold of and they never answer emails, so it can be kind of tricky trying to get hold of them. We had another book where, the author apparently is really, really difficult and might be really complicated to work with, and so it was a good book, but do we really want to have to deal with the author? There are lots of really great authors, but there are really great human beings, and there are human beings that aren't so great, and these are things you have to take into consideration. The same
these are things that you take into consideration when you're deciding which book you might want to put to a publisher. If you go with that book and the author is difficult, maybe don't include very difficult author.
Keep it internal.
This is the kind of.
This would never. This is not meant to. You're not actually. This the
Not
print is
for
not.
public consumption version.
This is actually a little bit too big. Can you see too much detail here?
Maybe.
Probably. Maybe we should move on.
Yeah.
Okay, so the pitch. What do we include in the pitch?
We spent quite a lot of time on this. I mean, some of it might sound. I don't know if it does sound. Sometimes it sounds a little bit straightforward, but we spent a lot of time. What to include, what order to include it in. This is what we came up with in the format that we really wanted to stick to. At least for us, this is what we thought would work for us. So.
And just to point out that we're focusing quite heavily here on, I guess, a written pitch. I know you're going to be preparing your 3-minute pitches, your elevator pitch, which is really good. Essentially, that live picture you would give to someone, whether in a formal context or because you happen to meet them somewhere, you would be essentially based on the written pitches in word. You'd be pulling out the key information. You'd be thinking, what are the key points that I need to get across? Obviously, if you have 20 minutes to make a pitch, maybe you'll have more information. If you only have 30 seconds, it'll be just the main details. So, key details to include. These are going to be really simple things like title of the book, the name of the author, the publication date.
It is.
So that can be obviously, if you have a 600-page novel, that could be, there might be publishers that just because of the cost of the translation, that just wouldn't consider it.
Number of sales, if you know. Yeah, time. The success it's had, prizes, etc. And then we include what we call a snapshot or a hook. This is a short description which describes what the book is, the main themes, the main characters, the main arc of the book. Then a brief synopsis. And I should point out that we try in our pitches, our aim is to get everything on one page. This is an initial presentation to a publisher. If they're really interested and you've hooked them with your hook, then you can always send them more information. So a very brief synopsis, not too much detail. If there are any reviews and quotes that you can include, which would obviously translate yourself from the original language, clearly. And some information about the author, a short biography. Again, I might mention success they've had with other books, because publishers often say that they don't buy a book, they buy an author. Publishers are interested in an author over time, in publishing their first book and then publishing subsequent ones. If it's an author who's already got a huge backlist, then they'll maybe take the book you're offering them, and then they'll have room in the future to publish some of their other titles. What else?
Just one thing, you mentioned sales, that is really important. That can be a little bit tricky to find out. I mean, if you have good contact with the agent, and source language agent, your publisher, then sometimes they'll share that information with you, sometimes they won't. But try and get that information, because the UK publishers or the English language publishers will want to know that, and they will have an idea. If you say it's 50,000 books from Denmark, then they'll know that that's a decent sales. That's quite good for Denmark. So it does, if they know it's language, they have a good sense for that. So don't be worried that it's only maybe it's 70 copies, then maybe you should include it. But
and you may feel slightly daunted about jumping into this world of publishers, but it's what publishers and agents do all day. They're talking with each other and across the globe and talking sales and numbers of copies and rights and all of these things. For one book recently, I contacted a publisher out of the blue who didn't know me. I had to spend about 10 minutes explaining to her what the Starling Bureau was. No, we're not a publisher, no, we're not an agent, exactly. I mean, in the end, for this book, she ended up sending me an internal PDF where they listed all the publishers they'd sent the book to over the previous year, the meetings they'd had with them at Frankfurt Book Fair at London, little copies of the email replies. Really good insider intel. So this is an example of the pitch for Zoë's book, the Polish title. And as you can see at the top, one of the things that grabs your eye is obviously the key information we have here on the side about the book itself, and the biography of the author, and then information description about the book at the top. On the left-hand side, I guess, is more of a short version. And then on the right, we have the cover of the book, we have a sample translation, The sample translation we don't put on our website, at least not at the moment. That's the kind of thing we might send to a publisher if they've already expressed interest. Basically, the more professional looking you can make your pitch appear, the more chance there is of it getting noticed.
Yeah.
Now, this is video.
Yeah, and this is from the London Book Fair. It's Sarah Brainerd from Scribe. So when you go to these events, pay attention to what these experts are saying, because they give just little tidbits sometimes that can really help you out. So.
And just the background is that one thing that's always that publishers like when you pitch a book to them is to know what's this like, what other author is it like, where does it fit in, is it like a cross between so and so and so and so, and here she is giving a little bit of few tips about what's different.
Should just go on and play.
And potential security search. Yes, that's fine. Is this the whole thing?
Yeah.
It's worked when we tried it before.
27 minutes or 23 minutes? They had it set up so
This is where your reading really helps, not only in your target language but also in English. You want to compare your author to something that the publisher is going to have read and recognise, but is not the most obvious author you can think of. Don't say into the next Murakami, don't say into the next Roland, because it's not, is it?
Sure, that's on that.
There's no sound. Where's the sound?
So if you are widely read in English and you can draw a nice comparison with someone whose writing is actually stylistically similar, that will, one, give them a better idea.
To compare this to, and you'll notice that I haven't said this book will really appeal to people who read Vegetarian, because guess what? It's nothing like The Vegetarian. So when I'm working on a book, especially with translation, I do try and read books that I think are from that culture or relevant to it, to try and understand a little bit more the landscape. So I read both of Hank Kang's books that have been translated to English, which I loved. But they just didn't, this was nothing like that. It just had completely different style, different tone. So I really thought about what it reminded me of, and those books are the ones that I chose. The Life of Pi and A Tale of the Time Being. The other thing it really reminded me of is actually Princess Mononoke, which is the animation by Miyazaki, which I absolutely love. Those are quite strange references, but that's just me really trying to be honest and give an example of something that is actually meaningful, that people might actually respond to. Whereas if you just say, oh, it's an Italian book, it's just like Enna Ferrante. Oh, it's a Korean book, it's just like Hank Kang. People, you need to have a little bit more imagination than that, I think. By contrast, with this book, what I would compare this to is not Swedish. I wouldn't say it relates to any other Swedish books I've read. I'd say this book relates to books like East-West Street by Philip Sands, or a book like, obviously, 1945 by Ingmar Bergman, or even something like The Silk Road by Peter Frankopan, Narrative History. So you're locating the book. Anyway, I'm going to stop, but I'm just trying to give a...
Yeah. So this ties into the other thing that we're talking about is to read in English as well. To read, not translation, but read it's been originally written in English. So you have these comparisons to make. So even if it's just you read the long list or the short list for the Man Booker Prize, not the international, but the Man Booker or another English prize. So know what's out there in English and make interesting comparisons. Don't say it's the next Elena Ferrante or Krausko or something like that. Unless it is, but it's not that many. Yeah.
Okay. This is really, 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 really important. Okay. Check that the rights are available before you get too far. Now, I imagine
that this far, it's too far.
It's too far. Yeah. Some of you this may be like Martian to you, because often translators come into this and some of us really don't know anything about how publishing works. So it's good to try and educate yourself a little bit with that. But publishers' agents, they sell rights in the books to each other. And so you'll want to know, have they already sold the English rights to this book to someone else? And so you need to contact the copyright holder. And usually you look inside the book and you say it says copyright and whoever. In the case of France, it's usually the publisher, because authors usually end up having to sign over their rights to the publisher. It may say the name of the author. You know, in general, the publisher is usually the best person to contact, or the agent, or it can be the author directly.
The first time I had to find out who had the rights, I mean, I went first to the publisher, and then went through a stream of different people who were trying to find out how to get a hold of the author, and that was through authors societies in Denmark and other places. So it's very difficult in the beginning to figure out how to do that. You could contact the Translators Association, maybe give you some advice on that, or the relevant one in each country might be able to help you. Maybe.
And it can work quite differently for different countries. I know Zoe often tells us that it can be quite frustrating sometimes in the Brazilian publishing scene to work your way around and get that information. France is usually fairly easy. It will depend on the country. But really check before you do any of this.
But you need to get permission before you start translating in theory as well.
Yeah.
So you don't want to be putting anything out in the public place. If you have started translating something,
even a sample,
don't share that with anybody until you've got permission.
So funding. This is quite crucial too, because obviously there is a lot of funding that exists that publishers can apply for, but there are also some schemes that you can apply for directly as a translator, even if you don't yet have a contract. And that can be quite a big selling point for a publisher, because if you can come to them and say, okay, buy this book, it's great, and by the way, you can cover 50% or 70% or 100% of my fee because I've got this grant, then that's going to be really key for them. Because remember that, if a publisher is buying, in the case of a perhaps more literary book that's not mainstream, they might pay 1,000, 1,500 quid for the original rights to publish it. But, it may cost them 5, 6, 7 grand to pay you to translate it. There are quite a few funding bodies who, national funding bodies, for example, France has French Voices, where you can apply for a grant for a book to be published in the US.
Denmark has a sample translation fund, for example, where you can apply to get a sample of I think it's a few thousand words, which will include a pitch as well. I can't remember if Norway still has. I think Norway and Sweden both have a similar thing.
And quite a few countries do. There's Pen Presents is a fairly new scheme whereby you can apply and they will give you, I think, £250 to prepare a pitch and prepare a sample.
Just a pitch.
Just a pitch. And then there are the Pen Time grants, which are US based. This is a very large pot that was largely endowed by the multilingual translator Michael Henry Heim, who translated from a dozen languages, at least. And this provides, I believe, it's not always the total, but it provides quite a significant sum. And I think you get the money once you...
Is it after either if it's been published?
Once it's been published or after you've done the translation.
After the translation is completed. And that will be up to the entire translation of the whole book. So that's the translator can apply for it. So maybe you don't want to go and translate the whole book, but it's important that the translator can apply for that fund. So it's not just for publishers or agencies.
And occasionally you'll come across weird situations where maybe the author is going to pay for the translation, and sometimes it can even be a good book. Because quite often you have publishers can contact you and say, "Hey, please translate my book, and I'll pay you for it." I translated a book where a very rich lady had contacted the author because, to complain that the book didn't exist in English and her English friends couldn't read it. It was a wonderful book, and she ended up writing a very big check to this British publisher. Does it actually work? It takes time.
Yeah. I was one of the first books that I pitched, actually. It was one of the first translations. I don't think I had any books behind me at that time. And I had some contact with a publisher through various contacts it was my language teacher's team. And I went out and found a bunch of different books and pitched a couple of them to this publisher, and they decided to purchase this particular one. And that is being published, I think at the end, I think in September, I think it's being published. It's American the Gods. It's about a little boy who goes up to Valhalla to save the Vikings save the Viking gods from destruction. But that initial contact was in 2011. And I pitched it to them, I think, at the beginning of 2012. It's now 5 years later, and this is finally being published. So it takes time. There was a number of things that happened in between there, but these take time. Yeah, not just the translation part of it, a lot of other things. Yeah.
And at the moment, as far as Starling Bureau is concerned, that there's one publisher that's quite interested in one of our pitches, one of our books. And we've had sort of several interesting email exchanges with other publishers of a more general nature about the kind of things they're looking for, the kind of books we're interested in. Part of what we do too is also, providing what we would call market intelligence. Not just pitching books, but sort of ideas and information and things are rosy.
So that goes back to the question of what is the purpose of this pitch? Because, okay, you may find that no one picks up this title that you love, but along the way, you may have built up relationships with numerous publishers, and you've proven yourself to be knowledgeable, trustworthy, good at dealing with your agents, your authors, your source market, and good at replying to them. So you've built yourself a network and a reputation. So yes, it's a lot of work, and it may not result in what you think is the aim of your pitch, but it will be beneficial.
All right. Well, yes, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and have a look at our website where we have pictures up for our first 5 books and information about us. And does anyone have any questions? We have a roving mic.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, did you have a first?
And we will be around for the rest of the day. Come up and talk to us.
Thanks very much, by the way, each of you. For that. Do you and have you pitched poetry? And if so, how different, considering that the commercial end is negated more or less, everything you said, how different is or are pitches compared to potentially gazillion-selling novels and whatnot that you may do?
We agreed from pretty big, because I do translate some poetry and theatre translation. We agreed from the beginning that we would only pitch book-length publications or works. So if it was an anthology of poetry, then we would consider that. We haven't come across that yet. If it was an anthology of short stories, if it was an anthology of plays, or something like that. That was an agreement we made. We wanted it to be not necessarily that they're all commercial books, but yeah, that was the we decided. So not at the moment.
But I think that the basic rules kind of apply, but sort of shifted. And I think in the case of poetry, you'd probably be wanting to develop a bit more of a relationship with the publishers first. There are not that many publishers who publish poetry. There are some publishers who publish poetry and prose. And, then with your pitch, it would possibly be similar. You would have some description of what the collection was. Maybe you might include a couple of sample translations of the poems or something like that. Probably it would start with a bit more of a conversation.
And I mean, a lot of the places to start with, things like that, or a lot of the American literary, online literary magazines, that sort of thing, that sort of thing. And you probably won't get any money for it, but you can then say this poem has been published by this people, so that they do build up over time.
And I mean, you do have quite successful authors of prose who also do partly write poetry. The fact that they've been successful with their prose can be a selling point to their poetry.
Yeah.
I wasn't exactly clear on your sort of e-pitches, like, things that you're not doing in person, but something you're sending to publishers, not in person.
Well, I mean, you mean sort of where we send them to, do you mean?
No, I mean, you had it and you sort of went over something, but I couldn't read anything on the
Yeah.
because it was really small.
Yeah.
And if was a really fast point, but like I know for poetry, a lot of stuff has to be done online to online journals and things like that. And so I was, you know, and for a lot of publishing, I imagine a lot of correspondence is not in person. And pitches would possibly be made via email and submission forms and things like that. So I wasn't exactly sure what you had said you would recommend including.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we would say, you know, a one-page pitch, a PDF containing the key information, short description, synopsis, the stuff we talked about, and then you need to find the person to send it to. You can't just send it to the general email of a publishing company. It may be someone you met in person. It may be that with a colleague, you know, you're on a forum site at work or Translators Association, you've asked, does anyone have a contact at this publishing house? Then you would send it to a particular editor with a nice little covering message, and depending on whether you know, if you don't know them already, then you'll have to present yourself. If you do, you know, this is so-and-so, I met you last month on the book fair. That would be your initial opening.
Okay, you just include everything that you recommended including.
Yeah, but I would make it quite short, and probably in your covering email again a couple of 2 or 3 lines about what you're pitching, so that they actually want to open the attachment.
And make it clear, I mean, if they want more information, then there is more information available, but try and keep it as concise as possible. I mean, some people are even talking about just doing a 2-line book. You know, really keeping it just a really good book and not filling up too much space. And then if that gets them interested, then you've got more information. Then you can do, you know, maybe something like a reader's report.
By all means, say if you'd like more information, do ask me. I've got a sample I can send you.
Exactly.
Over there. Okay.
It was worth the wait. One of the sources of funding that I didn't see on the slide was the European Union's Creative Europe program has grants for literary translation, which are grants for publishers. I imagine translators can ingratiate themselves with publishers by pointing these out to them.
Yeah, but those aren't fund. I think we were just mentioning funding that you could apply for as a translator without a contract.
There are definitely funds other than the ones that we've mentioned that publishers can apply for, and you can certainly encourage them to, because they don't always know that they're available.
And that certainly comes into your market knowledge, and knowing your publishers is supplying that information. As you said, it will ingratiate them to them. It means you know about the market, you know what's available. They might not have heard that, I don't know, Iceland is offering promotional funding for something. I mean, so definitely it's worth that.
Do you have any experience of doing books that benefited from the Creative Europe? I gather UK publishers have not been not too interested and not too
successful. Because they tended to, the feedback I've heard is that it was a complicated process.
But I mean, I think I went to a publisher that did receive the Creative Europe, and they were very happy with it, and they didn't mention any of the notorious red tape or anything like that. They were very happy with that they were able to put out books that they otherwise would not have been able to put out.
Yeah.
So I think there is some fear about that it can be a long process. There's a lot of information you have to give, but I think if you don't have any other, if there's no other way to publish these things, then I think it's definitely worse.
And I mean, it's not as if, you know, Arts Council funding, for example, I know the applications for that are quite complex. So it's not as if, you know, it's not as if Creative Europe is unique in being particularly complex to apply for, I don't think. Maybe just puts publishers off more, maybe because Arts Council funding would be sort of larger scale funding, lots of projects over a year, whereas this would just be one book. I don't know. Any down here?
In the middle or in the front?
Go to the middle first.
In the middle first, and then just.
It's hopefully a quick one. So you mentioned to kind of check if the rights are available and kind of stop there if they're not. But you also said that there was one of you from a publisher kind of told you that the rights have just been sold into a particular language. And so are there any times where it's not game over if the rights have just been article.
Oh, right, yes, no, I understand the confusion. Okay, so with the checking that rights are available, I guess there's two aspects to that. One is, has it already been published in English? If the rights have been sold, it's already been published. Even if it was published 30 years ago, I mean, it may be time for a new translation, but if it's already published, certainly any time nearly recently, within the last 10, 20 years, then you're probably going to have a very hard, well, it will either be impossible to get it published again, or very hard. The situation I was referring to is if the book has already been sold to, and I say like just now sold to a publisher, then it's quite possible they may not yet have a translator in mind for it. Or they may have one in mind, but they haven't decided, in which case if you can get in there quick and sort of suggest yourself as a translator, that's what I was referring to. Yeah.
There's another, just down here.
Actually, on the subject of rights in other languages, it's useful if you can find out that
which countries it's sold to.
It's been sold in other countries, which publishing house in the foreign markets it's been sold to, because the UK publisher may very well have a relationship with them and know, oh, if it's been published by such and such a place in
we publish exactly the same exactly. So they just yeah, can tell you.
I just wanted to ask whether operated as you do, whether that's quite an unusual thing, where you see the benefits over just going it alone.
I mean, I think I think at the moment it's unusual in terms of being the kind of more formal setup that we have. I mean, it grew out of the fact that, in general, sort of as friends and colleagues, we would help each other with things. I mean, in the past, I've asked people to, read a sample translation I was going to send to a publisher, for example, stuff like that. I think that one of the main things I think that's great about it is it forces us to do stuff. I mean, all the books that were in our first pitch, I think for the most part were books that we've been, meaning to get around to pitching to someone for ages. And so we have a responsibility.
We have half-finished bits. We have half-finished bits of many projects, and as you've seen from the PDFs that we've put together, it's a fair amount of work to collect all this information and to present it nicely. And if there's nobody pushing you to do that, it's quite hard sometimes to get it finished. But if you have a deadline of all 5 of us are going to bring something at the next meeting, that's how it comes together. And then when something does come up, like a funding opportunity that you can apply for, you have something packaged together that you can submit. Or when someone asks you, do you know any great books from Africa?
Yeah.
You don't suddenly have to write the whole pitch overnight.
Yeah. And we said that from the get-go that we wanted to. We all started here 5 years ago. 5 years ago, yeah. And we've gotten to a certain point, but we all wanted to come sort of past that point, and we thought that this would be the way forward to push ourselves to do more, to get more involved in translation, in getting more of things that we want out there, and also in a public way as well. But, so in that sense it helps.
We meet every 2 weeks, more or less, in person, except for news in Japan. And we communicate through a platform called Slack, which is like a private messaging network where we exchange information about different things, set each other deadlines, we think about the future. So it pushes us all to do that. And as you said, we've got this continuous feedback. I think it'll be a model which will happen more in the future. As I say, there's already this New York collective, Sedilla and Company, where we got our idea from. There's Paper Republic, which has been going for a while, which was set up to promote Chinese literature. It's not strictly a collective in the way that we work, but it's sort of been close to that, I guess. And I've heard, talk that I think there's a group of Slavic translators who are interested in setting up something similar. And it's also because, when it comes to networking, a lot of networking happens when you're at an event and you know somebody and they say, hey, Mr. Publisher, do you know my friend, Mr. Translator, who, So
then
we can network for
each other. Literature, yeah, exactly. It's a way of checking across.
And as translators, we do this all the time anyway.
Yeah.
But as a collective, we're actually able to have a lot more detailed knowledge about what people are working on. and we can more formally swap contacts. We all combined our contact details from publishers we know, and it was incredible because 5 of us had completely different lists.
And it was really weird. I mean, there were people who, like, for example, Words Without Borders, which was run by Susan Harris and Samantha Schnee. I know Susan Harris, I say very well, but I know I've met her a few times, talked to her. I think everyone else in the collective was like, well, you know, I've heard her name, but you know, I don't think I've ever actually met her. And I was like, really? But like, we each had things that were similar, sort of to that, when like people you know, I think you would know, but and you were like, haven't you? No. So that was very useful. I think we need to wrap up.
Maybe we have coffee time.
Yeah, coffee time. But do come up and talk to us.
Yeah, we'll be here till 9ish or something. Yeah, so move on.
Thank you.